I'm Professor Michael Chi, and I'll be talking about sleep, sleep loss, and cognition, a year in review. I advise for oral health, but the company did not influence this presentation in any way. This talk is tuned for persons seeking new evidence linking sleep to cognitive function from adolescence to old adulthood, who want evidence that has a more direct connection to daily life or practice, and who want some references to take away. In my literature scan, I looked at the effects of sleep manipulation on cognition, the effects of habitual sleep on cognition or cognitive outcomes, and this covered working age adults, old adults, and slightly on adolescents. Articles from 2024 to the current time were examined. As the scope is somewhat limited, those looking for a more general review of the topic of sleep and cognition should perhaps look at a review that Ruth Leong and I wrote about 2 years ago, published in Annual Reviews. The topics covered in this talk will be caveats in work related to sleep and cognition, challenges in making inferences because of the way sleep is measured, multi-night sleep manipulation and cognition studies, older work on older adults who are at risk of cognitive decline or dementia, and work on working adults, sleep and cognition, and finally, a quick tour of interesting commentaries and reviews. I won't cover experimental studies of a more cognitive neuroscience nature, including neuroimaging or electrophysiology studies. How do we know the brain is affected, brain and cognition are affected by sleep loss? This comes from work on sleep deprivation and sleep restriction studies, as well as much more limited work about sleep banking or extension. The issue with these studies is, while they may show effects, lab-tested levels of sleep loss are uncommon in real life. We may undergo some sleep deprivation, but it's rare to undergo total sleep deprivation or sleep restriction to 5 hours for several nights in succession. So the effects are there, but they are perhaps overstated. Multi-week studies evaluating habitual sleep patterns are emerging, and these are ecologically more valid, especially if they have objective sleep measurement. In terms of cognitive domain, the impact on vigilance is clear, but it is less clear for multi-domain or for complex tasks. In-lab experiments also ignore many real-world confounders, such as the stresses many people encounter in real life that affect both sleep and cognition. And sleep is also affected by third factors that affect cognition, such as an existing illness or the fact that one may... To counter some of these deficiencies, I propose that large-scale objective measurement of sleep is needed, and that these studies be annotated with relevant information. The reason for this is that if we want robust associations between sleep and cognition, noisy source data has to be eliminated or reduced because it attenuates the true association, which cannot be fixed by just increasing sample size. And this is an equation that shows that relationship. Unreliable assays of sleep and cognition will affect the true observation of their association. Now, an important point here is that self-reports can overestimate true sleep duration by as much as an hour. And here's data from the Sleep Health Heart study showing that a person's self-report of habitual total sleep time can significantly exceed the PSG determined total sleep time. The offset from the estimated total sleep time from self-report the morning after the PSG, the offset is less, but is still significant. And this is true right through age. Matthews and colleagues found that persons with depression, a hostile personality, or perception of poor health may show greater discrepancy. In truth, this discrepancy is typically between 20 to 30 minutes, but for illustrative purposes, I'm just saying it can be up to an hour, as shown in this study. Now, the difference between self-reported sleep durations and objectively measured sleep durations is material. When comparing all-cause mortality or cardiovascular mortality, one typically and sleep duration, one typically sees a U-shaped function with a steeper effect of longer sleep duration on both all-cause and cardiovascular mortality. However, when objective sleep was measured, as in the sleep health study, in this case with a night of PSG, then the relationship between short sleep and mortality or cardiovascular disease is retained, while the relationship with long sleep and the same is significantly attenuated. Another point is that habitual sleep regularity, which is not captured with subjective assessment, and fragmentation carry more information about one's sleep health than average sleep duration. So this is some data we got from a subject showing the sleep pattern night after night over a month, and that this person has a very regular pattern with an average total sleep time of 6.7 hours. The SRI indicates very regular sleep. In contrast, this is another person with the same average sleep duration, but far more irregular sleep, and this represents an unhealthy pattern. The third point I want to raise is association and causality. In this talk and others like it, it's tacitly assumed that poor sleep is directly related to cognitive decline. But of course, we know that this relationship is not so simple. Often, there is a mediating factor, such as when poor sleep increases the risk of cardiovascular disease, which in itself is a risk factor for cognitive decline, the so-called mediated effect. Then there is the possibility of reverse causation. In its pure form, it's not likely, but in a mediated effect, it's possible, where a person who notices that they are in decline becomes depressed, and that contributes to poorer sleep. And finally, there's the condition we think happens in many neurodegenerative diseases, where the process of neurodegeneration results in both poor sleep as well as cognitive decline. I move on to some of the contemporary studies on insufficient sleep and cognitive performance. And as I mentioned earlier, some of the newer studies involve multi-nights of the exposure to the condition of interest with objective sleep tracking. And here is one conducted by Molly Zimmerman at Marie-Pierre Saint-Onge's group. And in this case, young adults were exposed to either adequate sleep or insufficient sleep, defined as sleeping 1.5 hours later than habitual. What was achieved was 1.2 for a period of 6 weeks. separated by a washout period. And then cognition was observed through a number of standardized tests. The sleep I mentioned was measured by actigraphy, and it had a quite a tight coefficient of variation. What the investigators found was that working memory and executive function showed reduced practice-related benefit. And this was important to demonstrate here because these tasks, when repeated, show practice-related improvements. So the sleep restriction resulted in reduced practice-related benefit. Now, another task, another experiment reported by Smithies and Campbell involved 40 esport game players. The game they chose, Rocket League, is played by about 90 million players around the world, and they recruited persons who participated in a competition and separated them into a control group and a total sleep deprivation group. They were then examined the performance in cognitive tests, subjective assessment, and gameplay was assessed in duels between the TSD or sleep deprived group and the control group. But during each of these contests, which was separated by a week, the respective players did not know if they were playing against a person who was sleep deprived or who had normal sleep. So the authors took pains to ensure that the participants were very well matched in terms of ability, both in terms of their percentile rank as well as the experience in number of hours played. They were also closely matched in terms of the sleep obtained, which was carefully monitored. This is important because when it came to looking at the PVT performance in the control condition, the control and the total sleep deprivation group were well matched, but as expected in the experimental condition, the sleep deprived group showed a higher number of lapses. Now, what is very impressive is that when it came to the actual gameplay, even after 29 hours of total sleep deprivation, the contestants in the control group compared to the experimental TSD group showed very comparable performance across multiple aspects of gameplay. So this is a convincing demonstration that motivated persons can transcend the effects of 29 hours of total sleep deprivation in a complex task. Now, a follow-up on that single study is a nice review by Larissa Wust involving 44 studies that put participants through a single night of sleep restriction. Most of the time, the more reliable tests were the KSS and the PVT, as well as several executive function tests. The authors found that sleep restriction for between 2 to 6 hours for one night increases subjective sleepiness, impairs sustained attention, but like the previous study showed, was not found to impair more complex cognitive functions, and they found the suggestion of quite a nice dose effect as well. Now, sleep variation and or variability is something that requires objective measurement to determine clearly, and this is a lab experiment performed by Jun Lo, where her team compared the effect of a week of stable short sleep where the simulated weekday sleep duration was 6 hours, to a simulated week where the average sleep duration during the weekdays was 6 hours, but it was set as 8 hours or 4 hours a night. June found that the variable, both schedules, because the sleep was short, impacted PVT, but the variable sleep schedule in this case produced significantly fewer lapses in the second week. Both processing speed and subjective sleepiness were expectedly impaired. Now, this contrasts with a study performed a year earlier by Shirley Lee's team in Hong Kong, where the participants underwent a similar kind of alternating sleep schedule versus regular sleep schedule. However, a critical difference is that the average sleep duration with both schedules was 7.5 hours, which is in the range of adequate sleep. So under these conditions, the variable sleep participants experienced effects on negative mood and sleepiness, but there were non-significant effects on the vigilance, response inhibition, processing speed, and working memory. So this suggests, even though it's not a direct comparison, that the variable sleep pattern is probably, it could be better or worse depending on how much sleep you have, and that 1.5 hour difference in total sleep time might make a difference in outcomes. The topic of greater sleep variability was also explored in a study on 782 adolescents from the Futures of Families and Child Wellbeing study who wore wrist actigraphs for a week. And in this case, the investigators found that the issue of misconduct, probability of expulsion over the past 2 years increased with variability in both sleep onset, shown here, as well as sleep duration. This work seems to bolster the evidence found in Andrew Phillips' study concerning sleep regularity and grades in college students, published a few years ago, and overall speaks to the importance of sleep regularity and timing as a factor that can benefit health, cognition, and well-being. So the studies presented looked at overall variation over a week, but what about fluctuations in daily sleep and how they affect mood, motivation, and sleepiness? This was what Alyssa Ng explored some time ago, and she looked at 119 university students who underwent objective tracking with an Oura ring for 2 to 6 weeks, and every day participants submitted mood, motivation, and sleepiness ratings in the post-wake and pre-bedtime window. The key finding in this study is that longer nocturnal sleep duration relative to that person's habitual sleep duration affected the next day mood, motivation, and sleepiness, but did not influence the following day's ratings. Further, the extent of duration increase or decrease relative to that person's average was critical, because the person's sleep duration relative to other participants did not affect was not correlated with the next day mood, motivation, and sleepiness. Also, higher intra-individual sleep variability in general resulted in a lower ranking in mood and motivation in the post-wake window. Similar findings were obtained when Lin Shen from Joshua Wiley and Bebe's group studied 205 participants, also with actigraphy monitored sleep. We move on now to work done on sleep schedules in special groups. This is work performed by Stein Massa from our team, examining postgraduate year 1 medical interns who either underwent the traditional call schedule, where the doctors undertook 24 hours or longer overnight shifts 5 to 7 times a month, or took these night shifts consecutively once every 2 to 3 months. Each participant underwent sleep and activity tracking, provided subjective appraisal of affect and well-being through a mobile phone-based ecological momentary assessment, and undertook laptop cognition tasks. The compliance in this study was very good, with sleep monitoring 84%, and with the EMA sessions, even though they were busy interns, about 60% compliance. In terms of sleep, the regular during the regular periods, the call group and float group did not differ, but during the night shifts, the call group actually got a little bit more sleep than the float group. However, in terms of sleep regularity, the float group showed more regular sleep and also better sleep quality. In terms of well-being, again, the float group showed, or rather conversely, the call group showed poorer sleep quality, higher sleepiness, and lower motivation post-call. The post-float group showed equivalent ratings post-call compared to their regular days. In terms of cognition, the post-call call group showed poorer memory and poorer vigilance. And again, the post-float group showed equivalent ratings or performance compared to regular days. So this study clearly showed that the float schedule is superior in multiple aspects: sleep, well-being, and cognition compared to the call schedule. Further, taking a night shift nap improved vigilance on both schedules. In a more specialized study performed on military personnel, Guzzetti from Sion Bank's group found that a 10-day exposure to each of 4 different watch types showed differences in sleep and cognitive performance. And these results can be looked at during a review of this study, which I'm not going to get into details. Now, a topic of great interest to this audience is sleep and the risk of cognitive decline or dementia. And the first topic I'm going to cover is prolonged sleep duration. So I'm going to present the summary findings from two reviews that were conducted in 2024. The first one involving the comparison between risk of cognitive decline with short sleep and long sleep, involving 55 studies. Now, importantly, only half of them had about 10-year follow-up. This is the impairment determined from cross-sectional data at study inception, and you can see that expected U-shaped curve between sleep duration and cognitive impairment. What was interesting is, following 10 years follow-up, what was found was that with moderate sleep, which was defined as 7 to 8 hours, the risk was standard. But with short sleep, there was some elevation of risk, but that elevation of risk was attenuated compared to the cross-section study. But with 10-year follow-up, there was continued finding of higher risk of cognitive decline. So with the Connie Howard and Gil Livingston study, short sleep was defined slightly differently, less than 6 hours, and the focus was on dementia occurrence. The findings were similar in cause. With short-term follow-up, the risk of dementia with both short sleep and long sleep was elevated, but with long-term follow-up, the risk associated with short sleep was attenuated, but with long sleep it persisted. So it seems that brief sleep duration may be a prodromal symptom, whereas long sleep duration or the report of long sleep duration, because most of these are also subjective reports, increase the risk of cognitive impairment. Now, the challenge, of course, with these studies that were reviewed is that the sleep measurement was mainly weighted on subjective sleep duration, self-reported sleep duration, and the teaching is that with such self-reported long sleep duration, participants spend a lot of time in bed but are not actually asleep. So future studies to clarify the actual relationship between total sleep time as well as time in bed should measure sleep objectively. To this end, Shou Chin from our lab looked at over 700 older adults whose average age was 75 years old and who had up to 30 days Oura ring monitoring and who underwent multi-cognitive domain test battery for cognition. And unlike the univariate analyses, which are typical of most studies, she performed a multivariate analysis of both, relating both the cognitive variables and the sleep variable. And this partial least squares correlation found that the sleep score accounted for about was associated with the cognition score with the R of 0.2. This is modest, but this is what the effect size is. The contributors to the sleep score were sleep fragmentation, as well as measures of sleep regularity. And the cognitive contributors were verbal memory, executive function, and processing speed. Importantly, sleep duration and timing measures did not contribute to the multivariate correlation between sleep and cognition in these healthy older adults. So the point of this work is that we start thinking of clustering different cognitive tests and different sleep tests to obtain a more holistic representation of the scores with both these sleep and cognition. Now, what about we've talked about older persons. What about midlifers, which I think much of the audience is? This study led by Yuling and from Christine Yaffe's group examined 528 midlifers who underwent 5 types of cognitive tests. And here impairment was arbitrarily defined as minus 1 SD from the mean. And sleep fragmentation, duration, and timing was assessed. And the key finding here was that actigraphy measured greater sleep fragmentation was independently associated with worse cognition in these domains in midlife, whereas there was no association between sleep duration or self-reported sleep quality and cognition. Moving on to naps, this is quite is beginning to be a well-studied topic now, and this one is one that came from the China Health and Retirement Longitudinal Study, and it found, like some other recent studies, that while the nighttime sleep duration showed a U-shaped association with MCI risks, persons who napped less than 30 minutes had a lower risk of MCI, or minimal cognitive impairment. And this finding is consonant with the one found in the NHAT study from the US, as well as the CFAS study from the UK. In all these studies, shorter naps that were intentional as opposed to unintentional may actually be protective for cognitive impairment. The final study in this class relates to a condition that we all may encounter more frequently as we get older, insomnia, and this comes from the NHATS data with 10 years of follow-up. They looked at 3 aspects of insomnia, whether you had sleep initiation insomnia, sleep maintenance insomnia, or if you took sleep medications. And interestingly, sleep initiation insomnia in unadjusted models showed an increased risk of increased hazard of dementia, whilst taking into consideration socioeconomic status and health status, significantly attenuated this effect. Now, the interesting thing, of course, here is that sleep maintenance insomnia was actually protective. So this might be somewhat reassuring to persons with insomnia who remain healthy, because the study conclusion was that sleep initiation insomnia and hypnotic use could both raise the risk of dementia, but there is significant contribution of health status and social demographics. So if you're in good shape there, the risk is attenuated. So finally, I conclude through some comments about notable reviews and commentaries. So probably the most interesting one here is the one from Anders Fell and Christine Warhold about the flexibility of individual sleep, and that it may be dynamically related cognitive function. Not everyone needs to sleep the same, and this varies in context. So one of the points they made is that if we are given one of the suggestions they made, I don't necessarily agree with this, is that if you have time to adapt to sleep loss, then you might initially there is deficits, and then you learn to adapt. However, if there's less time to adapt, then and the sleep restriction is severe, or you have high sleep need, then the performance accumulates. And then persons who vary in their tolerance of sleep deprivation, and more resilient persons are better able to tolerate mild sleep restriction, and upon re-exposure, the persons who are resilient again are resilient, but the persons who are vulnerable could experience even more severe effects. I mean, these are some of the phenomena discussed, and what they suggest also is that if there is motivation, then as we demonstrated several years ago, with improved reward provision, performance in the PVT can be higher with high reward condition, and this even helps attenuate the deficit in PVT performance when the person is sleep restricted. Another review of interest is the evaluation of sleep opportunity, need, and ability, and this also speaks to a bit of flexibility or variability in how people adjust to different levels of sleep provision. And that's by Hannah Scott and Michael Perlis, which appeared just recently, a few weeks ago. Yeah, and then the year was had its share of interesting reviews. These are more neuroscience in nature. The coupling of sleep rhythms for memory consolidation by Staracina, and a review about how sleep protects against neurodegeneration by Parhitska and David Holtzman. And then there's work on the sleep circadian interface as a window into sleep disorders as well. Now, related to that, sleep and mental illness, this is sort of important because this relates to cognition also. Many people with mental illness problems, have poor cognition. There's the topic about improving sleep to improve stress resilience. And this review here covered the effects of bad sleep on the neuroendocrine stress response, as well as the negative effects of stress on both our resilience as well as sleep quality. And then there is this work on chronotype and mental health from Locke and Zeitzer, which discussed how late sleepers might be more vulnerable to mental health problems and the mechanisms involved. And I couldn't go through this session without mentioning this interesting work from Sean Drummond's group, led by Gerald Lim, talking about the impact of sleep loss on decision making, where they reviewed the major protocols or methods used to evaluate decision making under conditions of sleep loss. And it was a really nice review, and they made the recommendation of integrating computational modeling alongside just behavioral metrics to understand what happens with decision making when we are sleep restricted or deprived. Now, one of the key themes of my presentation is why it matters to measure and infer well. When talking about sleep and cognition, or sleep and health in a bigger way, we have support from different associations. This one's from the American Heart Association, that educate a broader audience of the importance of sleep on maintaining brain and cognitive health. And one key thing that people like to emphasize is the decline in slow wave sleep as a mechanism. And then, the justification is made for the benefit of sleep. However, when you look at a systematic review on sleep biomarkers for predicting cognitive decline in Alzheimer's disease, this is from Claudio Lugari's group, SWS percentage doesn't actually figure in this equation. Now, this is not to say that slow wave sleep is not important, it's just that the way we measure it is not indicative of that risk. And this paper, while important, was cited 83 times, and this is a paper suggesting sleep is important. On the other hand, the Dementia Prevention Lancet Commission suggested that, hey, look, this is very complicated. We can't offer significant advice about sleep and dementia, even though it's acknowledged that people with dementia sleep poorly. And this got over 1,000 sites. The point I'm saying is that if we get our as a sleep community, get our act together and make watertight or present more robust evidence linking sleep and cognition, especially in settings that matter to many readers, it will further our cause. So suggestion for future work: move to measuring sleep objectively at scale, and to use a minimal panel of common measures, and they can be standardized from what we know about vulnerability to different domains different cognitive domains of sleep and aging. We need more observational studies from free living persons, And then the interactions between sleep, cognition, and multiple contextual health factors, such as the one with the study with insomnia, are needed. And then we need greater participation from researchers outside traditional bastions of sleep research. So with that, I would like to thank the various parties that contributed to this presentation, including my lovely lab. And here is a WSS Talks microsite that we have that contains more of our talks. So thank you for your attention.